Who's the most dangerous human alive right now? I knew a kid when I was 13 who had the gingerest hair on the planet. It was like Aaron Brew. He used to shout, "I'm a pirate," and go under the table and bite your Achilles tendon on the back of your foot. I don't know where he is, but he is 100% the one. My mom when you lose one of her Tupperware containers. Edit, typo. Leroy Brown. He's the baddest man in the whole damn town. When I was in 8th grade I watched my best friend's uncle rip a whole cigarette in one puff and then lift an entire transmission out of a car, so I'd prob say him. Some guy you haven't heard of because he wants it that way. Probably some guy in the middle of nowhere with an undiscovered disease that can wipe humanity out. There was this kid in elementary school I knew who used to eat his pears with ranch. And enjoyed it. Shitty bots/accounts that repost AskReddit threads in order to advertise their porn accounts. Stelio Contis. Edit, who in the hell is Randy, am I missing something? Edit, thanks for my first award. My cousin Randy posts a lot of pictures on Facebook of skeletons riding motorcycles and stuff with captions about how loyal he is, but if you betray him he can be your worst nightmare, so probably him. Randy. Man, I heard about this guy Randy. Better not piss him off. Whichever president drops the most bombs. Whoever it is, I bet almost no one knows him. Incapability to harm a lot of people? Whoever runs China or the US at any given moment as the two largest credible nuclear powers. In a capacity of person-on-person violence? Probably someone we've never heard of. What's something people don't really think about during a zombie apocalypse? Having good shoes so you don't get blisters. I'm always shocked in zombie movies/shows that people forget bicycles exist. It's a relatively fast and quiet way to get around that no one uses. Gasoline will go bad in a few years. The smell. Most people will die of the virus in their beds with fever, home or hospital, at least at the start. So expect most zombies to be in pajamas, hospital gowns with their asses hanging out, or butt naked. Dental hygiene will go out the window. How every scenario in which they think they'd do all right starts with them being ready. I imagine a whole lot of very capable people would just be sleeping in, and wake up to the sound of breaking glass and die in a minute. The zombie hordes would eventually rot away. Their bodies are decomposing, so eventually their tendons and whatever would no longer be able to allow the undead to be mobile. Survivors just need to wait it out. We could stop all this zombie apocalypse nonsense if we'd simply tie the shoelaces together on folks before we bury them. The ideas that you come up with, the places you think about going to, are probably the same exact thoughts that countless other people have as well. Yeah, I'm just going to bunker down at the nearest Walmart and hold the place to myself. No, you won't, because country boy Terry already laid claim to the place and is gonna pick you off with his firearms if he sees you encroaching on his territory. Or likely there will already be a massive crowd of zombies waiting for you when you get there. Dental problems occur. Play a game like Zomboid and your first few days if not weeks is built around hardcore survival, scavenging and discipline via trying to reserve and avoid wasting supplies. But after you've settled, and built something to last, and have your needs met, what then? Like The Walking Dead, it becomes painfully less about the zombies by some point and more of the everything after survival. The eternal nothing. Waste management. I see this in other doomsday scenarios as well. With no septic system or trash collection, I see disease being more of a risk than a lot of other factors. Same with injury, sure there's first aid, but without a power grid to refrigerate meds, something as simple as a cut or scrape can prove fatal. Edit, I'm talking about general population. Not the people who are well versed in survival and have a limited/working knowledge of how to live outside of society. As for the cut/scrape example, I'm speaking generally, not literally as in it doesn't much to kill people. Double edit, changing the scenario a bit. So you have this doomsday bunker and you can't break the seal to the outside as the air is poison. You have 10 years of canned goods and MREs all saved up. How are you getting rid of all the trash? Unless you have an airlock that you can pump out, you're screwed. In the Air Force we did exercises. Another guy and I had to sit in a single cab Ford Ranger all day. The trash generated from just 2 MREs is insane. Multiply that for days, weeks, years. Cover your skin. A full face helmet and Kevlar jacket/pants would pretty much make you zombie-proof. The lack of sleep. Real, actually peaceful sleep. Between zombies and the people taking advantage of the lack of order, real beneficial sleep will be almost impossible the first few years. *Edit. Wow! Didn't expect this. Thanks everyone. What's the most horrifying real-life death you've heard about? I spent a career as fireman in a big city. About 15 years ago we responded to a middle-of-the-night fire in the basement of an old, triple brick, 2-story single-family, balloon frame residence. On this particular weekend, the 9-year-old daughter was having a sleepover. 8 kids and the parents either got out or were pulled out by responders, but we couldn't find the daughter. All efforts on scene were directed to rescue operations, so the fire quickly advanced as firefighters searched throughout the pitch-black, hot-as-fuck structure. My partner and I were searching the second floor, working solely on feel, and we could hear her screaming for help. "Okay. We hear you. We're coming. We got this." My partner and I were experienced. We'd made other rescues. We were professionals in our craft. But the second floor layout didn't make any sense, doors that could be felt, but were sealed shut, rooms longer than you would have expected, etc. We learned later that the entire second floor has been remodeled, leaving some of the original design pieces in place, but extending rooms and modifying entrances. It was the hottest fire I've ever been in. With everyone, rightly, focused on more than a half-dozen rescues, the fire was left unchecked and the thing was just ripping, running vertically through the pipe chases. Eventually, we didn't hear her screaming anymore. We stayed up on that floor well past when the chief wanted us out. Throwing our shoulders into faux doors, trying to breach walls into the bathroom, etc., until finally we were out of air. We were outside telling another crew where our search left off when the roof collapsed into the second floor. It was hours before we could recover her body. Over a career of fire and EMS I've seen my share of terrible, tragic shit. You empathize, but you disassociate to a degree. You have to. If you didn't, you'd work one shift and never come back. So I learned not to carry too much horrific stuff with me. We did our best at everything we were called to. Sometimes it worked out. Sometimes it didn't. That has to be enough in this line of work. But that little girl screaming is one of the 5 to 7 calls that I still think about, and can still hear. We did what we could, and we did a lot of good that night. But we failed her. Back in the mid-70s, my mother worked at one of the many sewing factories in the US South. They had gone on break around 10 a.m., and noticed the lineman up there working on the pole. They came out for lunch at noon and he was still up there, but not moving. He had grabbed a live wire and it fried him in place. Had to break his arms to get him down. He was also the father of one of my school buddies. Sad face. After Pearl Harbor got attacked, they raised the hulk of one of the sunken battleships and found one of the compartments had a calendar scratched onto the wall indicating someone had survived in the partially flooded room for like 2 weeks. I was coming home from baseball practice in high school, and when coming down my street I see my neighbor across the street outside in the driveway crying. She was 6, and it was pouring. I asked her what was wrong and all she said was Amy is in the closet. I said what? Her parents weren't home nor were mine. I didn't want to have her explain it, so I asked her to show me. We go in her room, and she is hanging in the closet with a noose around her neck, blood everywhere from slitting her throat and wrist. I picked her sister up as she was sobbing and held her and called 911. I went to feel her pulse to make sure she didn't have one. I was 16, I had no idea what to do. We sat outside on the porch until the police came. I couldn't get a hold of their parents as I didn't have their phone numbers and the youngest daughter didn't know. The mom and dad came home and it was just awful. The scream the mom made will always haunt me, and obviously that whole scene will haunt me. It isn't as horrific as these stories are, but to me, this was just as bad. Edit, changing the name of the girl out of respect. I had a friend who was engaged to an underwater electrician or welder. I mean, this man would go down so far it was completely black. Long story short, he went down one day, and never came back up. I don't remember if something ruptured or if he was shocked to death, but I remember thinking how awful it must have been to have died in such an abysmal place. My cousin walked under a grain auger and the hood of his hoodie got caught in it. He was sucked up into it and decapitated before it could be shut off. My grandpa had to clean his head out of the auger. Edit, I have now gotten a few Reddit cares messages from this post. This happened over 20 years ago. I was a child, who did not witness it firsthand. I was not even at the age that death made sense to me. I am doing okay. Thanks for caring. There was an old guy who lived down the road from me. he wasn't good on his feet so only used the bottom half of his house. He went to go to bed one night but fell in front of his old electric heater next to his bed in the living room and couldn't get up again. The poor bloke was cooked alive. When the paramedics turned up they had to go into the garden to vomit. It was horrific apparently. I only know this because a couple of family members went to see what was happening when an ambulance turned up at his house. I'm not sure who called it. They said it was truly awful. The guy survived for a while in the hospital with his injuries, but unfortunately passed. He must have been in front of the heater for hours, the poor bastard. In Victoria, Australia, some freeways have these speed wires which are like 3 cables strung along a fence instead of your standard solid barrier. First time I drove to uni it was raining and a motorcyclist fell off in front of me, hitting these cables and literally exploded. His head flew about 50 m before it splattered on the road. Pretty fucked thing for a 19-year-old to see. This girl bungee jumping to her death in Spain, because she misheard no jump, as now jump. Maybe not the most horrifying, but absolutely terrible and tragic. Race car driver Russ Phillips was killed when his car hit a catch fence roof first, and his upper body was dragged along the fence leaving pieces of his face, brain, and torso all along the fencing. He was decapitated and shredded in half. A truckload of hot asphalt for resurfacing roads was accidentally dumped on a teenager in my province. He would have died instantly but other people on the crew still got severe burns trying to dig him out. People being walled up inside of a brick column or wall. The punishment is called immurement. Last one I heard of was a serial killer in the 1800s. They walled him inside the corner of a building. People said they could hear him screaming for mercy for a week before he fell silent. Imagine, inside a cold, damp, pitch-black chamber too cramped to stand up or sit down. Most likely was crawling with bugs. No food, no water, no mercy. I imagine he went mad before the second day was up because he knew death was the only escape. Edit. It has been brought to my attention that I had some details off. I had the date and days of torment off. He was screaming for 3 days and it happened in early 1900s. Someone was kind enough to research it and put a link below. I told this story based purely on my own shoddy memory. I can barely remember a 3-item grocery list, so I thought I did okay, tongue sticking out, my mistake for any misinformation. I heard a story from WW1 that many times when people had charged, gotten hurt, and were immobile from their injuries you could hear their screams for help while being eaten alive by rats over the course of several nights. Guy I knew of flew himself and his family to Florida from the Midwest for a Christmas Disney trip in his personal plane. He was flying in some lower-seated clouds when his engine died. He tried a couple things to restart his engine but couldn't get it to come back. When he came out of the clouds he was over a forest with no way to glide somewhere to land and had to put it down in the trees and hope. The crash killed himself, his wife, and 2 of his 3 kids except for his youngest daughter who walked 2 miles barefoot in the late December snow to find help, but she survived. The horrific part of it to me though is that this guy's plane has 2 separate fuel tanks. One in the left wing, and one in the right wing. The reason the engine died was because it was fuel-starved. The pilot had been flying on a single tank for the entire flight up until that point, but had another wing filled to the brim with fuel. He could have saved his family's lives as well as his own, and prevented his daughter's trauma if he would have just made sure to follow the checklists that pilots of that airframe practice religiously every day that they go fly. The guy who got slowly cooked alive inside a tuna can oven, the other guy who was pushed into a manhole and steamed for like an hour, and the Russian woman who was eaten alive by bears while she talked about it with her mom over the phone. Also any number of cave diving stories. The most terrifying one I have a personal connection to was a man my father knew who was slowly sucked into an industrial fan. Truly terrifying stuff, and rip to all those who suffered them. I hope their families somehow found peace.